song.
I can do it by myself.
Is this sound?
I can.
Is this song?
I'll be wrong.
Stop!
Okay, stop. Stop. Wait, my phone.
Yes, that speaker's on.
It is.
It was so close, man. You have like a whole entire car right there.
What?
And you have a whole edge and you're just like super close. Like our puppets were touching and cracking. This was our puppets.
Hello. My name is Jared. My name is Jared.
Oh my
Well, your real hair.
God. Well, you better see you.
Better not.
I will. Now it's time to pull out all your
Give your puppet some crazy hair.
No.
No. Your hair already looks bad enough. Oh, dude. No, not yours. His.
No, look, I'm flicking it.
How about mine? Does it now?
Look,
It looks
I
like a
can
troll.
tell.
Does it
This
now?
is the
It
kid.
looks like a troll, so
This
yeah.
is the kid version of the dad in there. Yeah.
Saying that's what Jared's hair looks like.
No, I mean like in the puppet room with the orange haired guy. With a beard. No, I got some. It's stop. Stop touching me.
I want to.
I'm gonna grab your puppet if it does go up there. Give me your puppet.
Ron, do this for your puppet. Ron, do this for your puppet. What, man? Do this for your puppet, Ron. What kind of like this? There's ants back. There's not ants in there, I swear.
It's probably this little spiky thing.
You're a spiky thing.
You're probably gonna get spikes.
No, it's. Is that short? Rollin, guess what? Reed here. Reed.
There's also more.
Run. No, it's all like I got bit on my foot. Hey. I'm ripping mine.
Did you ride it?
Yeah.
Easy memories of how you helped
Now.
kids.
Ron, you got Koi.
What?
4 sheets of paper.
No. 1, 2.
I heard you 3, 4. I believe I can't even erase. Lincoln.
That's alright. It wasn't sticking anyways, was it?
Broke. If you say, oh my word, I accidentally broke my name tag when you said, I'm gonna rip it.
Because I'm sick and tired of it. I have a goatee.
Hey, you gotta have the beard too, give me.
Hey!
I'm gonna make you a beard and then you go.
We even have one of those.
Unless you want your
My name's
teacher not to
Jared.
know who you are.
My name's Jared.
I'm the weird child sending the raid back with the dog. That just like licks the dog. And the dog, we just hug and we just lick it.
Your mom can probably hear you. My name is Duck.
Why do we have our own names?
I don't know. My name should be Chanel. Chanel.
I wanted to be
I make it more black. My name's
Alright, glad you're at Vacation Bible School. Looking forward to a good night together, alright? Let's sing a few songs.
stream. Merrily, 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 life is but a dream. Let's do it in rounds.
No, let's not do it at all. You've been singing in the car since we got here, since we got in the car. Well, just a few moments of peace.
But peace in the car is boring.
Exactly, and that's why I love it so much. It's good to be bored every now and then. How about just looking out the window?
Well, there's a cow, there's another cow, another cow, and another cow.
You don't have to do that, Corey. Usually when there's one cow, there's several cows.
Electricity pole, electricity pole, electricity pole.
Lake, and the same thing goes for electricity poles. Usually when you see one, there's going to be several.
There's some grass.
Just stop it, okay? Can you just talk quietly among yourselves? Please, no singing, talking, quiet.
I wonder what we're talking about at Vacation Bible School tonight.
What? What did you say? I couldn't hear you.
I couldn't hear a word you just said.
Now, Rylan, I didn't say you had to whisper.
Well, I don't want to get yelled at again.
I'm sorry, Young. I guess I just don't have the patience for these long car rides. I need to work on that. What were you saying, Rylan?
I was saying I wonder what we're going to talk about in Vacation Bible School tonight.
Last night, my class learned about Jesus riding a donkey into Jerusalem.
Can we get a donkey, Daddy?
Now, that's all we need.
My class talked about Mary and Joseph going to Bethlehem, where Jesus would be born. I love that story.
In my class, we talked about how Jesus went to a garden to pray, and then he went to Golgotha. That was a sad, sad story.
It is a sad story, but it sure did have a happy ending.
Jesus sure went a lot of places, didn't he? I wonder if his parents ever yelled at him.
I doubt it, because I doubt they were ever in a car with 3 kids and a dog singing "Row, row, row your boat" at the top of their lungs.
Hey, they could have been riding donkeys and singing it.
For some reason, I just don't see that happening.
Daddy, where is Jesus now?
Oh, I know that. My friend that is in fifth grade class told me that last night they learned about Jesus coming back alive and going to heaven. He's in heaven with God.
Heaven? I bet it's going to be so pretty there.
It will be beautiful there, and the Bible tells us that. I think you'll be in that class tonight since you're in the 5th grade.
Daddy, besides being beautiful, what will it be like in heaven?
Well, son, there's a lot we don't know about heaven, but I can tell you what we do know. In heaven, no one will ever be sad, there won't be any crying, no one will ever be worried about having enough food or money, and no one will ever get sick, and no one will ever die.
I know God and Jesus will be there. I've always wondered what they will look like.
And people that have obeyed God, God tells us to do where they'll be there.
That's right. Everyone who has followed God's plan of salvation will be there.
Will there be fighting and wars in heaven?
He gave us his instruction book to follow by.
Instruction book? Like those sheets of paper you throw away when you're putting something together?
Well, yes, in a way. God's instruction book is the Bible. In it, it tells us what we need to do to get to go to heaven. He's already done his part by sending Jesus to earth to die on the cross. Jesus took the punishment for the bad things that we do. If we try to do our best and ask God to forgive us when we mess up, and follow his instructions in the Bible, we'll get to live in heaven when we die.
There's just so much I don't understand.
That's why it's a good thing that we go to Bible class and Vacation Bible School so that we can learn more.
Will there be fighting and wars in heaven?
Absolutely not. There will be peace and love.
So you won't be yelling at us, Daddy?
No, son, I won't. And you won't be singing off key either.
That just sounds perfect.
Well, that's the best way to describe it. Perfect.
We're here. I see Mr. Austin.
Yeah, there he is. Hey, Mr. Austin. They're all yours.
Alright, so depending on what class you went to last night and where you're going tonight, you get to hear about all those things that they're looking forward to at Vacation Bible School. We have teachers in our various classes that are talking about when Jesus was born, talking about what Jesus did in his life, talking about when Jesus died, talking about how Jesus went back to heaven.
I have my
Seems like that's not the right thing to be
About all
doing.
that in this class.
I have my head linked like this, so I couldn't.
And yes, we're going to go to our classes. So we know the books of the New Testament. We're going to learn those, okay? Let's sing them together. It's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Acts and letters to Rome. forward to our class with Mr. Mike Tace. He's had 2 great lessons Monday and Tuesday night. I know we're in for a good lesson tonight as well. Just a reminder, or maybe new information if you haven't been with us yet, this class will dismiss at 7:45, and then there are refreshments in the end.
You all right?
For you to go and enjoy with a puppet show back there. And then if you're looking to pick up your kids, they will be done in here at 8:30. So our skit and snacks will take place for them as well. They'll come back to their classes, finish up, and then you can pick them up in here at 8:30. All right. Looking forward to our class together. Let's pray together before we turn it over to Mr. Taylor. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for the opportunity we have to be here this week, to study lessons from your word, to be encouraged by one another, to laugh and smile. But Father, we're thankful for the opportunity we have to study the Bible together. Father, we pray for Mr. Tace tonight. Give him a good remembrance of the things he studied and things that he's prepared so that we can learn from them and apply them to our life. We're so thankful for Jesus. For all these things in his name, amen.
Thanks, sir. Hope everybody's doing all right tonight. We are going to talk about a little bit lower back there, please, ma'am. I'm echoing. Thank you. So this is our topic tonight. And so the topic that we were given was about the time of the crucifixion and trial of Jesus. Yeah, is that bothering y'all? Okay, bothers me. Now, there we go. There's a reason that's up there. All right, we're good? Oh, still, there we go. That's better. Is that better? Okay, this is are we still echoing? We'll start here in a second, okay? Just as I was brought up saying, just told you water. I'm used to talking without a microphone, I'll admit it. Out at school, I'd do chapel with a couple hundred, I'd do 400 or 500, and I wouldn't have a microphone on, so I got a real good voice. Ooh, I'm sorry, y'all. It hadn't been on the last couple of nights, apparently. We be echoing good. Hey, I'm fine with that. That's what I was telling them. Is that okay? Without a microphone? All right. Can y'all hear me? All right. Okay, so let me tell you, we'll start again. There's this funny little skit by Abbott Costello, and you're either really old or you like old stuff like me, called Who's On First? And so basically it kind of goes along like this. The one guy's talking to the other, and he says, I'm trying to find out the guy's name on first. Now, what's on second base? No, who's the guy on first base? That's right. So what's the guy's name on first base? No, what's on second? I'm not asking you who's on second. No, who's on first? And the whole thing goes back and forth. And basically, there's a reason I'm telling you this. Because sometimes you get mixed up about things. By the way, I love amazingly useless facts. See that fellow there? His name's Chen Lung Hu. In 2007, he played for the Dodgers. He got his first hit And Vin Scully, who was in the Hall of Fame announcer, he says, I can finally say who's on first base. Now, so basically this is this little dialogue that revolves around failing to understand. There's a reason. There are multiple things in the Bible that are hard to remember and easy to mix up. Now, to help me in my auditorium class, I told you I've taught it between 25 and 30 years. I taught a course for 3 quarters, and I call it the world of the Bible. We talked about geography, we talked about all manner of different things, and that was my pandemic project. That's what I did when I was in the pandemic, during the pandemic, and I made this up. And it's been really useful. For example, we tackled the lands that, to me, are really easy to mix up. I call them the ites. We talked about the Amorites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Amalekites, and the Midianites. Now, we spent several weeks talking about them, trying to find out, because they're all in the Bible, they're all important, and they're all easy to mix up. So basically, we talked about different things like this. Well, a couple of weeks ago, literally, one of my fellow seniors, that was always fun when I got to retire, I told the auditorium class that I got old with them. And literally, that's what happened. I started going to the old folks Bible class, and those are the folks that I taught for a long time. Well, one of those seniors asked me a question. He said, can you tell me what the Sanhedrin is and who the Pharisees and Sadducees are? Because we had talked about it during that class. I said, sure, no problem. But I got to thinking about it. So honest to goodness, I said to myself, tonight's topic is the arrest, trial, and crucifixion of Jesus. Well, I decided to focus on the trial of Jesus. The trial of Jesus had a Roman part and a Hebrew part, a Jewish part. I decided to focus on the Hebrew part. The Hebrew part refers to the trial of Jesus before the Sanhedrin. Now you've heard it, you know what it is, but that's what I decided to focus on. Now, to really understand the trial of Jesus, you need to understand what the Sanhedrin is and who made up this group. And there's people in there like the high priest and the elders and the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And all of these groups, so let's look at the first thing that can make understanding the Sanhedrin difficult. One, if you have a King James Bible, you won't even find the word Sanhedrin. They use council. So Jesus appeared before the council. If you look in the New American Standard Bible, which is supposedly the most accurate translation, they don't use the word Sanhedrin. They use the word council. The English Standard Version, which tends to be a real popular version right now, they don't use the word Sanhedrin. They use either council when they're before Jesus is before them, or in Acts they talk about the Senate. So in Acts chapter 5 they called all the Senate of the people of Israel. This is the group that we call the Sanhedrin. In the NIV Bible, the Sanhedrin and council are used. So this is a real popular modern edition. So if you look at Matthew 26, the chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin is used. But if you look at Luke 22 and verse 66, in the same NIV, it says the council met together and Jesus was led before them. Same group. They use 2 different names. Is that confusing? Yeah, it is. Some newer translations even use the word court. The New Century Version, which I like that particular version, it led Jesus to their highest court. There's one called the Living Bible that says the chief priest and in fact the entire Jewish Supreme Court assembled there. So when you're reading all these different words, this potato, are the same thing? Yeah, they are. They're the same thing. They're the Senate of the highest court of the Jews. And this is who Jesus appeared before. They are the same group with a different name. Okay, how do you keep from confusing them? In kind of simple terms, unless you have an NIV, you're going to have the word council. So basically, you have a King James, a New King James, a New American Standard. Most of the older translations especially are going to use the word council. So when Jesus appeared before the council, if you have an NIV, they'll have council, they'll have Sanhedrin. And most of the time, they use Sanhedrin. So how do you keep from confusing them? You might need to use context. Context is to look at the situation. So if you have a group that's opposing Jesus, probably that group, the Sanhedrin. If you got a group that's trying to persecute or execute Jesus, Sanhedrin. How about the apostles, the early church? They're same group. So again, if you use the context, especially of an NIV. Okay, let's talk about the Sanhedrin. This is a specific name for this ruling body over Israel, and this is literally how they met, kind of a horseshoe, a semicircle. Now, the Sanhedrin is used much more often. If you have a King James, they'll sometimes have Sanhedrin. That's probably technically more correct. Probably that M on the end is right, but we generally don't use that. Sanhedrin basically is a Hebrew word that they borrowed from the Greeks. There's a whole bunch of languages. You've got Latin, you've got Greek, you've got Hebrew. It means to sit together. Sin, it's a synonym. That means is to sit together. So basically they sat together in a semicircle so they could see each other. Supposedly they like to see everybody. So where you were sitting, you could see everybody in the room. It was a generic term for any council that was made up to be a ruling body. So to further complicate things, if you look at Matthew chapter 5 and verse 22, whoever shall say to his brother Raka, or basically it means good for nothing or fool, shall be in danger of the council, or shall be answerable to the Supreme Court, or will be liable to the council, will be answerable to the court, or shall be in danger of the Sanhedrin. There's your M there. Now, this is not the one that tried Jesus even. Most people think this was just worthy of a court's action, that if you said it, that's bad, and you need to go to court. There were two groups that wore the title of Sanhedrin in ancient Israel. They're the same group. It's not confusing, I promise you. The Great Sanhedrin and what they call the Lesser Sanhedrins. The Great Sanhedrin is the one national body that tried Jesus. Every city with 120 households had a Sanhedrin, had a court, had a group. Now, this is kind of like our federal courts. The Supreme Court was the Great Sanhedrin. They tried cases that were appealed up to it. Like it says over here, they have authority. If the Great Sanhedrin told this one down here to do something, guess what? They had to do it. If there was a problem in a lower case and they couldn't make a decision, it could be appealed up to the Great Sanhedrin. So basically, it's just like the district courts or the courts of appeal can appeal up to the Supreme Court. So again, it can work both ways. There were 70 members and the high priest that were in the Great Sanhedrin. The lower ones had 23. But we're going to be talking about the one that tried Jesus. And we'll talk about the number here in just a minute. Every now and then you might see that there's 72. There are a few people that think there were 72. A few said there were 70. So you can see anywhere from 70 to 72, and most of the people think it was 71. In Numbers chapter 11, verse 16 and 17, the Lord said to Moses, gather unto me 70 men of the elders of Israel, and they shall bear the burden of the people with thee. In simple terms, they'll help you rule. They'll help you govern. How many? 70. And then they would put the high priest on later on when we had the Sanhedrin that tried Jesus. It's not found in the Bible after Moses. Now, some people think Ezra planned to have one, but we can't find any evidence of it. So during the time between the Testaments, they began this court again. And they called it basically the Sanhedrin. So this is the one we're talking about. It's the Supreme Court of Israel. It's a Jewish court of justice. They try these cases. Now, this is the group involved. You can see 35 members on one side, 35 members on the other side. 70, and then the high priest, as a rule, sat there in the middle. Who made up the Sanhedrin? The chief priest. Now, you might think that's one person. You're right. But they also had any former high priest, Annas and Caiaphas, basically were both high priests at times. former high priest, and high-ranking priest in the temple. So basically, these were the priests, the chief priests, they're called. The high priest at this time, since Herod the Great was appointed by Rome, they weren't of the descendancy of Aaron. So basically, they had got to the point where Rome was telling them who their high priest would be. There's Annas and Caiaphas. They were father-in-law and son-in-law. And both of them served as high priests, and both of them were appointed by the Romans. And both of them were pretty much subservient to the Romans. And since they dealt, all right, so you got high priest, chief priest. Second group, since they dealt frequently with matters of the Mosaic law, 613 laws, complicated, really small. If you read in Deuteronomy, if you read the Levitical laws, they're very technical. And basically, since there were a lot of matters about this, they also had groups they called lawyers or scribes. If you want to put it in simple terms, they were doctors of the law, kind of a doctor's degree, if you want to call it that. Matthew 22 talks about one of them, an expert in the law, tested Jesus. What's the greatest command? He literally was an expert. Now, you might say he kind of majored in the minors. We'll talk about that. But he was an expert. He had studied it probably his whole life. They were professional students of the law. So you have chief priests, you have scribes or lawyers. They were so highly learned in the Hebrew scriptures that literally they could give theological, religious comments and opinions on issues. Theirs held a lot of weight. So it's kind of like a judge giving an opinion. I could give my 2 cents worth, and I'm not sure you could round it up to 2 cents. But on a legal term, if you had a judge that had been a judge for 40 years, their opinion is weighty. And this is what we're talking about. They had the same kind of reputation. A highly accomplished teacher of the law, so respected that they taught law to other lawyers. So basically, they become teachers of these scribes, of these lawyers. I'm going to put a plain word. Why were these nerds given so much honor and respect? And they were. That's all they did. Since Alexander the Great brought Greek culture, and we'll be talking about this, and influenced Israel, the Sadducees, and you've heard of the Sadducees, had neglected the law. Basically, they were kind of following a Greek-Jewish mix, a hybrid version. So basically, they had been kind of neglecting the law, the Jewish law. The scribes opposed this. They said, that's not right. It's not in the book. You can't do it. Because they were accepting, again, this Greek and hybrid, Jewish hybrid. Well, again, we'll talk about them, I promise you. And the scribes became the go-to if you had a question. You didn't go to the Sadducees like you used to. You went to them. Because they knew the answer. And they knew the answer from the book. The scribes went from being called teacher as a courtesy to demanding teacher as a title and being treated with great deference. They dressed supposedly like nobility. They wanted a title, rabbi. It means my master or my great one. Rabboni is my great rabbi. Many turned toward Jesus and said, Rabboni. That's in John chapter 20. So this is an advanced role. The blind man, in Mark chapter 10, the blind man replied, Rabboni, I want to see again. So they were experts. They really were very smart. But in Mark chapter 12, Jesus condemned the way they dressed, pompous, their love of salutations. They like to be given greetings. Oh, look, there's the smartest man in Israel, or whatever they call them. Desiring the chief seats. They wanted important places. You know, if you've got a gathering at the speaker's table, if you're buying a table at some kind of dinner, Where are you going to pay the most? Back there in the cheap seats or up there with the speaker table? They wanted that for free. And the uppermost room at the feast, they wanted all the bells and whistles. Mark chapter 12, and some scribes were taking advantage of the generosity of others. New Living Translation said they shamelessly cheated people. Jewish scribes couldn't get paid for their expertise. So in other words, if you answered their question, they couldn't charge you. So apparently some of them encouraged people to give freely to the scribes to be blessed by God. So it's kind of one of those, if you really, think it was great, then you really need to contribute to the good of me, is what it's talking about. And that's what these scribes would say, these lawyers would say. You need to contribute and give. And some of them went as far as literally shamelessly cheating people, or pretty much taking, I tell you what, I'll help you. I'll give you advice that benefited them financially. Who made up the Sanhedrin? Chief priests, the scribes and lawyers, and what are called the elders. Sometimes they're called the ancients. Laity means people who aren't trained. Clergy and laity, these were laity. These were people who weren't preachers, priests. There were two main groups that made up this group in the Sanhedrin. You know who they are, Sadducees and Pharisees. Sadducees were usually the ones in charge. The Pharisees were usually in the majority. The Sadducees weren't liked as much by the people. The Pharisees were liked more by the people. And I want you to see the difference in these two groups. So what's the difference? We're going to have to go back in time to Alexander the Great, about 330 BC. Alexander the Great, in 15 years, never lost a battle. Never lost a battle. How did he get stopped? He got to India. He started in Greece, got to India, and his soldiers said, we're going home. We hadn't been home in 10 years. Literally, from that campaign, it would have been 10 years when they hadn't been home. Said, we're going home. And he ordered them, and they said, we're going home. Now, you can't fight without an army. So basically, that's the only way that he started coming back. And he died on the way back. But Alexander the Great never lost a battle. Those are all his, and you see in the little light red there. Compare that to the size of the U.S. His conquest roughly equaled the continental U.S. Huge, huge conquest. And basically he carried the Greek culture with him as he conquered. He was proud to be Greek, he liked his culture, and he took it with him. He wanted to impose Greek ideas to the far corners of his empire. He did it in a different way. He didn't go in there like the Babylonians and the Assyrians and basically say, you're going to do what I say or else. He would go in there and adopt some things from their culture. He might dress like their culture and do some things with their culture to encourage them to take on aspects of the Greek culture. He hoped that Greek culture would blend with the cultures of conquered people. It did. And that's where we get into trouble with the people in Israel. Because this Greek culture was blending into the Jewish culture, to the culture there in Israel. Alexander the Great, I'm a 6th grade teacher. I'm sorry, my vocabulary apparently is limited. They made Greek cool. By the way, see that in the corner? That's Greek for cool. So that means nothing, but I just like that. But I don't know what else to call it. Popular, whatever. They made it cool. People wanted to be that way. Conquered nations often eagerly adopted Greek language, culture, and religion. They didn't have to be beaten. They didn't have to be forced. They did it. The most popular name in these countries that were conquered by Alexander the Great, what's the most popular baby name for 100 years? Alexander. Now, you don't think of a country, France, a few of these countries that Hitler conquered. I named my child Adolf. No, they didn't. I mean, it didn't happen that way. They did him. It was amazing. Israel was a vassal. A vassal basically pays off another country. They were vassals to Persia. Alexander the Great conquered them, and they just swapped masters. So this is what happened. Many in Israel blended Greek into their ways. This is a fancy word, but it's called syncretic or syncretism. And basically it's blending different religions and philosophies in different ways. And you're trying to bring them together. Now, term title, Hellenization. Now, if you read some in Acts, it talks about the Hellenistic Jews. Well, you may know they're Greek. You may not know why they're Greek. Hellenization means to become Greek or to make Greek in your form. Now, it's from the Greek word Hellas, which is what they call it. If you go to Greece now, they call themselves Hellas. They don't call themselves Greece. It's not from Helen of Troy. I went probably half of my life going, it's Helen of Troy, that's Hellenism. It's this dude named Helen. Don't laugh at him, he'll kill you. Helen, all the Greeks descend from him. And so basically, he was the son of Zeus. And supposedly this is who. So basically, Hellenism is named for that guy, the son of Zeus. And Hellenism means to spread the Greek culture and the Greek ways and Greek ideas. It's imitating ancient Greek culture. Because, again, for lack of a better term, it was cool. And I want to be like the cool country. Jews found it almost impossible to escape the omnipresence. It was everywhere of Greece. There are countries in the world now that really get ticked off because American stuff comes in and the kids and the families want American stuff. McDonald's. They want Coca-Colas. They want to hear American music. That's kind of the same thing. So you can't go to a country and say, I will never hear anything American. Till you see the golden arches. Greek became the language of commerce, social intercourse, people back and forth talking. Greek became very popular, making it necessary to be fluent in Greek. I always ask the folks at school, 6th graders, do you kind of have in your mind that somebody in Bible times was a guy that wore flip-flops in a robe and he wasn't real bright? They were, I would ask them this, I said, how many of you are bilingual? I think I had one kid through the years that was bilingual. And I said, now I don't mean that you can't say a word in another language. You know, uno, dos, tres, taco, whatever it is. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about you could go in there and talk to somebody. Almost nobody. Probably people in Bible times were fluent in Greek. They were fluent in Hebrew. They could go down to the temple and they could listen to the services and the comments. Later on, they would throw a little Latin in there also. So basically, how many, I'm not going to ask, there's probably not a lot of people you know who are bilingual or trilingual. Many Jews began to adopt Greek customs. Now, let's just real quick here talk about Greek. Antagonistic means it's totally against what God says. So let's look real quick. 1, monotheistic. Oh, they're polytheistic like crazy. The Greek gods, you've seen them. The pantheon of gods. Man was made in the image of God. The gods were made in the image of man. Because they would be people. You've seen their statues and so forth. It was an emphasis on the soul and spiritual things. The Greeks, it was on physical. Hedonism and pleasure. That was what they pursued in so many times. Morality. They were very moral people. The Greeks wasn't their strong suit, especially in sexual matters. They were really not very moral at all. Hellenistic Judaism was basically you combine Jewish with Greek, and you're trying to combine what you want out of both sides. I thought about this. I'm gonna, if you remember this commercial, well, you got your AARP card. I'll say that. There's an old commercial that showed. It was really a stupid commercial. There's this guy walking down the street with a candy bar, chocolate bar, and there's a guy walking down the street with a jar of peanut butter, licking his finger. Well, the two of them collide. Well, what happens is they stick chocolate in the peanut butter. And one of them says, you got chocolate in my peanut butter, and the other one says, you got peanut butter in my chocolate. Well, the two of them eat it. So basically, one of them pulls out the chocolate, it's got peanut butter, and he eats it, and the other one dips some chocolate into peanut butter and eats it. And the commercial ended up with two great tastes that taste great together. The reason I told you that silly ad is basically, I kind of paraphrased it. You got your Hellenistic culture in my Judaism. Two great faiths that go great together. And this is kind of what they were doing. They were trying to take both of their belief systems and make it into this syncretic mix, if you want to get fancy. But they were trying to blend the two of them together. Many in Israel did blend their Greek ways into religion. And this is kind of what they did. And they put some Greek inside their Judaism. And it came out like that Reese's peanut butter cup. And this was called Hellenistic Judaism. Now, the rule of Scripture was rapidly being replaced by Hellenistic ideas, Greek ideas. So they were putting them in and kind of plugging them in their Jewish beliefs. The amount of Greek inside these Jews varied. Some of them had a little bit. Some of them had a lot. And it varied by the people. Hellenized Jews tended to be more affluent. They had money. They were more sophisticated. Wow, that's just the newest idea. They were for progress and enlightenment and all these new ideas that the Greeks brought. Because again, like I said, Greek is cool. So now we're going to have these cool new ideas with our old religion, and we can bring it up and make it more modern. The Greeks were open to new ideas from wherever they came. You know this from Acts. Acts chapter 17 and 21. All the people of Athens always used their time to talk about the newest ideas. And it's like, man, that's new. I like that. The Hellenized Jews were open to these new ideas. See, I like progress. I like these new things. I like variety. I don't like the old ways. And that was a really Greek way to look at the world. And there were a lot of Jews that had this really Greek way to look at the world. Like I said, Greek was cool. This led to two groups. Now we're going to talk about these two groups. The Sadducees and the Pharisees. The Sadducees. Many Jews, such as the priests, some of the priests, became outright Hellenists. So if you take that little labor, they were way over here on a lot of Hellenism. That's what they liked. There was a lot of it in their system. Some Jewish scholars added new ideas to their approach to biblical truth. So they had partly, 2/3, 1/3. And so basically they were a little less on that gauge. The Sadducees became the dominant priestly party. So most of the priests were Sadducees. So most of the priests were adding Greek ideas to Jewish beliefs. And they weren't outright pagan, but they weren't completely Jewish. They were kind of this blend, this hybrid. Sadducees tended to be more wealthy. You can see from I remember one particular thing, they found some artifacts. And basically they found a bathtub. You go, well, that's not a big deal. Back then it really was. And there was one of the Sadducees that had a bathtub that rivaled the King Herod's in size. And I mean, that indicated you were loaded. And they tended to have more powerful positions. chief priests, high priests, tended to be Sadducees. Some believe that when Jesus cleansed the temple of the money changers, it hurt them financially. How could that hurt you? This is what some people say. I'm not going to sit up here and say it's a fact, but you can find this in multiple studies and sources. They think the Sadducees possibly got a kickback from the money changers. So when you ran them off, they lost their income. And so basically, the animals that were sold at a high price, they lost that money. The Sadducees welcomed Hellenization. We like it. We like it. The Sadducees were political opportunists. They basically, they didn't mind. An opportunist is a person who exploits circumstances to gain an advantage. Like money, like power, like position. I can be the high priest. Although my descent, you can't trace it down, but immediate advantage rather than being guided by principle. And a lot of times they just did the thing that got them more. The Sadducees collaborated with the Greeks in Hellenization. And collaboration means to assist with or willingly assist an enemy of one's country, especially an occupying force, like the Romans. And they got along with the Romans. When they had a problem with Jesus, what did they do? Went over to the Romans, said, we need you to take care of our problem. They did it the same way with Hellenization. They even allowed the Romans to choose their high priest. This is how they gave in to them. According to the Hellenized Jewish historian Josephus, the Sadducees were haughty and harsh toward common Jews. They didn't like it. They kind of looked down on the little people. And the little people looked up at them with disdain because you're a sellout. You're getting along with the Romans. You're getting along with these people who are going to take away. There was a gymnasium. Now, gymnasium is not like you go watch a basketball game. It was for physical training, but the Greeks felt like that you did this in the nude. It was across a corner from the temple, and it was allowed to be built. This was a great affront to Jewish morality. See, they allowed that to happen. And the people didn't like that. We don't want that. We don't want that next to the temple. We don't want that around. And so basically, they came to be disliked by the common people. So the amount of Greek inside these people, Jews, would vary. Some of them had none. These were the Pharisees. So the Pharisees, the more zealous among the Jews, drew themselves apart. And they called themselves the Hasidim, the pious ones. And they became a distinct group. We are religious. We are going to hold to Jewish law. We're not going to mix it up. It's going to be pure, or their version of pure. They later were called, instead of Hasidim, they were called Pharisees. They separated themselves from the Hellenists. We want nothing to do with you. Instead of combining, new, hands off, completely separated. During the persecutions of a man named Antiochus, they became the most rigid defenders of Judaism and traditions. Now, we're going to have to take a break here to show you who in the cat hair we're talking about. Antiochus. Well, let's go back to Alexander the Great, of course. Alexander the Great died at age 32. Alexander the Great didn't have any kids, didn't have any heirs. So from the best we can tell, he divided it into 4 generals. He said, you take here and here and here and here, and basically you fight it out. Theoretically, traditionally, he said to the strongest. So whoever's biggest and baddest, you can take over. So let's go back to Israel. Down in Egypt, there was a guy named Ptolemy. It's kind of like pneumonia. There's Ptolemy and Seleucus. Basically, that's up in Syria, where Damascus, Syria, north and northeast of Israel. Israel was between these two kingdoms. These were generals from Alexander the Great. So what does that have to do with it? They ruled Israel. They're in between. Sometimes the Ptolemies, they weren't bad. Sometimes the Seleucids, and life was bad. And it got really bad when this dude named Antiochus Epiphanes, basically God manifest. If there is an ironic name, that's his. He was a Seleucid ruler. He was bad. He was rabidly Hellenistic. I couldn't come up with a better way than I saw a book. I read a book that called him that. That means you're Greek loving. And basically, I'm going to rule you and you're going to be Greek too. Or else. So he was forcing people to be Greek. You mean like the Jews? He replaced the Jewish high priest with a Hellenistic high priest. Circumcision was outlawed. Can't circumcise a child on the 8th day. Can't circumcise them at all. That's a Jewish thing. Kosher was outlawed. That's the food laws. The Torah was outlawed. The scriptures, the first 5 books, the books of Moses. You couldn't study it. You couldn't even have it. If you had it in your possession, you were in trouble. Sacrifices and festivals were outlawed. You could not celebrate any of the Jewish holidays, feast days, festival days, however you want to refer to them. He took the gold and silver from the temple, basically used it for himself. He put a statue of Zeus in the temple, God's temple there in Jerusalem. Big old statue of Zeus. He burned Torahs on the altar in the temple. So he would collect them and burn them on the altar of sacrifices. He would burn them there. He sacrificed pigs on the altar in the temple. Because you think of something that would upset Jews more than that. Basically, they got to a point where they revolted. And the Maccabees, the Maccabee brothers, Judas Maccabee, they started a civil war and basically they defeated the Seleucids and ran them out. It got to a point, as this I always think about Popeye, had all I can stands and I can't stands no more. And they started a war. But this is one of the tipping points. But this is what he was doing. And if you disobeyed, they killed you. Guess who got killed a lot? The Pharisees. The Pharisees said, no, you can't do this. And they wouldn't obey it. They wouldn't turn in their Torahs. They wouldn't obey what they said. They kept the Sabbath. They did all these things, and literally they were persecuted and martyred. So basically, these are the Pharisees. They were the ones who held tough through the years. The Pharisees were more representative of common working people. Basically, they had the respect of the masses. Hey, you walked the walk. You were the one that stood up for Judaism when the Sadducees weren't. They were selling out, and you were standing out and separating yourself from them. Owing to their devotion, they developed a great following and reputation among the people. You're the real followers of God. You're the real ones that we follow. But eventually, they became these sources of authority. So basically, people, that's who they started referring to. They trusted them. The Pharisees became the religious leaders of Israel. But you know what they said? I heard this a long time ago. When it's kind of like, I've told a handful of kids through the years, it's kind of like there's a button on your back, and when you tap that button, it inflates your head. So it's kind of like all that back patting inflated their head. And they caused them to be arrogant and conceited. And often this conceit led to literally kind of turning upside down the stuff that they had died for. that they perverted and changed all the ideas that they literally were willing to die for. In response to this blend with the Greeks and the Jews, they kind of started being obsessed with being, I'm not going to be Jewish. I'm going to be super Jewish. I'm not going to keep the law. I'm going to keep it better than anybody's ever kept it. And I'm going to keep it in the tiniest details. Matthew 23 and verse 23. You Pharisees give God a tenth of the spices from your garden. Well, aren't you supposed to tithe? Yeah, but most scholars that I've read think that particularly things like mint. Now, mint is basically, some people say it's an invasive plant. When I grew up, there was always mint that grew up around the faucet. And under the faucet, there was always mint. So if you wanted mint, you just went out there and picked it and tried to cut it back, because if you didn't, it'd just grow like topsy. And I don't know what topsy is. My mama taught me that. I'm sorry. But it grows with little effort. Now, if something just grows in your yard, it's kind of like saying, I'm going to collect a tenth of the dandelions and give them as a sacrifice. It's kind of like, now that's being ridiculous. Well, for lack of a better term, Jesus is saying that's being ridiculous. Matthew 23 says, you blind guides, that's the Pharisees. You strain at a gnat. You worry over how much mint, and you swallow a camel. So basically, you strain out your water, and they did. They strained out the water so they wouldn't swallow a gnat. But you swallow a camel. You swallow a greater wrong. They major in the minors. Matthew 23 says you neglect the more important things. Now you worried about how much mint to turn in, but you overlook justice and mercy and faithfulness. The big stuff. And you're worrying over mint, and you're not observing justice and mercy and faithfulness. It says, basically, Jesus said they don't practice what they preach. You need to do this, and they didn't do it. So basically, the Sadducees and Pharisees, this split came about because of the Greek influence in Israel. So who made up the Sanhedrin? Chief priests and the former ones and so forth, the priest families, the scribes and lawyers, the professional teachers, the professional learners, the elders and the ancients, the scribes, also known as the Sadducees and Pharisees. Now, hold on. And the Sadducees, where they go along to get along. They get along with, if you're into World War II history, they talked about people who collaborate. What they do? They got along with the Nazis. They would do enough where they wouldn't get in trouble with them. This is kind of what the Sadducees did. The Pharisees were obsessed with the little details and ignored the big stuff. All right, Sadducees in action, this trial. There were specific times and places for the Sanhedrin. Okay. These are the people who basically, you see right there in the front, I don't know if you can read from back there, the two little tables were clerks, or most call them notaries, and they recorded all the votes of the Sanhedrin. Why do you have two? It wasn't redundant. As a matter of fact, one would write down basically the reasons why they were acquitted, and one would write down why they were condemned. So they basically had two different things that they were looking for. They didn't have any attorneys. But you just talked about lawyers. That's not the lawyer I'm talking about, okay? So if you're talking about in the Sanhedrin, they did not have an attorney. The witness who accused the defendant gave their account in the presence. So they were saying, I accuse this person of whatever the crime was. They had to come in and tell the Sanhedrin, the 70 members, and the high priest what happened in their words. The accused was allowed to call witnesses to support their innocence. So basically, they could call So who was there? There was no lawyer. It was more like the Supreme Court. If you've read about what happens in a case in the Supreme Court, to a certain degree, the members of the Great Sanhedrin, those 71 people, did all the questioning. There were the accusers. They asked questions of the accused. They asked questions of the witness. So they were the ones, this is how the court went. When it met daily. Except never on the Sabbath and not on feast days. You never met the Sanhedrin on the eve of a festival. Or you never met one on Fridays. Now you may be thinking, but wasn't that a Friday? Yeah, keep that in mind. Why? Because the Great Sanhedrin could not sentence a defendant to death on the day of the trial. Couldn't do it. It was absolutely illegal to do it by their rules. Why did they do that? They were all about fairness. This is one of those that wow, I had a hard time with this one. I had to go to several different ones. If they ruled unanimously that this guy was guilty, they let him go. Would you go? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. You know the reasoning? If everybody in there feels like they're guilty, they didn't listen. And they didn't look at both sides. And they didn't try to understand or whatever. So basically, if you rule unanimously against that person, then you weren't giving them a fair trial. You let them go. So basically, this idea, they were looking at everything. The next day, they went over the whole thing again. Did anybody have a change of heart? Do you still want to execute the man? Is he still guilty? So, they would not conduct a trial that couldn't be finished the next day. Why couldn't you start one on Friday? What's holy about Friday? Nothing. What's the next day? Saturday. Don't have trial on Saturday. So if you can't start it, finish it on Saturday, you don't start it on Friday. And that was the rules of the Jewish court system. It meant from morning sacrifice until evening sacrifice. Well, I don't know what that means. Okay, I had to look it up too. First one's at 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. But didn't they try Jesus in the middle of the night? Getting where we're going here, okay? Because the trial of Jesus did not follow these rules that had been established for a long time with the Sanhedrin. The Mishnah, and these are teachings handed down. So this is kind of a book of teachings from well-renowned experts, teachers in the 1st and 2nd century. It states that no trial by the Sanhedrin could take place at night. Couldn't do it. Where did they meet? In the Second Temple period. So when they came back from exile, that's the temple they built. You know, where some of them cried and some of them were cheering. You couldn't tell the difference because they couldn't build as elaborate a temple as Solomon did. Call it the Second Temple. The Sanhedrin met in what they call the Hall of Hewn Stones inside the temple. Now, this is, they think, roughly the shape of it. It was on the outside and it was on the inside. So basically you could enter it from both places. Why the name? Exodus 20 says, if you make a temple, an altar of stone, you shall not build it of hewn stone. Okay, what's a hewn stone? Well, basically, let me show you. There's a hewn stone. Their building looked like the one on the left. Anything to do with an altar was stones that weren't cut by a tool. Because if you look right here, There was a part of the temple that was used for worship and part of it was not. And so to tell the difference, that this was not a place of worship, that this was a place of justice and law, and they made it out of hewn stone. So this is what they did. Now, the importance of the location, other than, well, isn't that interesting? This was a capital case. What's a capital case? Somebody could lose their life. So the Sanhedrin would be required to meet at the Hall of Hewn Stones. But didn't they go to the house of... They did. Were they allowed to? No. No capital sentence could be pronounced outside of that place that was halfway in and halfway out. But didn't... A sentence could be pronounced only so long as the Sanhedrin holds its sessions in the appointed place. There's a group of writings called the Sanhedrin. And basically one of the scholars says you can't pronounce death unless it's in that place. But didn't they? They did. The Talmud says after leaving the Hall of Hewn Stones, after they left the building, no sentence of death can be passed on anyone. Even a person named Jesus. Not supposed to. Wait. Wasn't there a Friday trial? Yeah. When did it not? Yeah. It was. Wasn't it in the wrong place? Yeah. These are some different critics of the trial of Jesus. National Geographic. Jesus rushed and rigged trial. This isn't, no offense to Mr. Sweeney here, but this isn't a preacher talking. That's National Geographic. And they don't generally, you don't think of them, well, let's go over there and get some religious articles. CreatingHistory.com, were the proceedings during the night against Jesus illegal? They said yes. WorldHistory.org, historical problems in the trial of Jesus. This trial, basically, the Sanhedrin's at the middle of that trial. This is the one that condemned Jesus. This is the group that condemned Jesus. This is the one that had a trial at the wrong time, the wrong day, in the wrong place. And hopefully now you better understand the role that the Sanhedrin and who they were and what they should have done. So that's why I tried to do that. Like I said, you know, a lot of you may understand it. I know I didn't. And it was kind of like she said, can you explain it? It sounded like, well, maybe this might help you to understand it. And so basically now when you're reading this account of the trial, basically you'll know who's on first. And so all these different ones. So I do appreciate you listening, and good Lord willing, we'll see y'all tomorrow night. Thank you. And let there be cookies.